At 5:13 in the morning, a fire chief lay dying in a basement, scalded by steam, while the city he'd spent his life protecting began to burn above him. He was the one man who knew how to stop what was coming, and he would never fight this fire. His name was Dennis Sullivan. For years, he'd warned anyone who'd listen that a big earthquake would break the city's water pipes and leave San Francisco defenseless against fire. He was right, and the morning it happened, he was the first casualty. Everyone remembers the earthquake, but the earthquake wasn't the killer. The fire that followed burned for 3 days and destroyed almost the entire city. As much as 95% of the damage came from flames, not shaking. And the men who tried to stop that fire made a decision that, in some places, spread it. They blew up buildings with dynamite. Buildings that then caught fire themselves and threw burning wreckage across the street. The official death toll was 478. The real number, historians now believe, was more than 3,000, possibly far higher. For decades, powerful people worked to keep that number small, but all of it, the dynamite, the spreading fire, the improvising generals, traces back to one absence, to the man who had the plan and who wasn't there to use it. So let's start where he started. The night before, it all came down. April 17th, 1906. San Francisco was the jewel of the American West. Nearly 410,000 people, grand hotels, cable cars, opera houses, the biggest city on the Pacific Coast, and it knew it. That night, the great tenor Enrico Caruso sang Don Jose in Carmen to a packed house. He was staying at the Palace Hotel, the grandest in the city. He had no idea he was about to flee San Francisco and swear he would never come back, and he never did. Caruso left the next day, crossed to Oakland, and kept going east. He died in 1921 without ever setting foot in the city again. But that's getting ahead of ourselves, because underneath all that glamour, the city had a secret weakness: its water. Every drop came through the Spring Valley Water Company, piped in from reservoirs out on the peninsula, and those pipes ran directly across the San Andreas Fault. A single big quake could sever the city's entire water supply in one motion. One man understood exactly what that meant: Dennis Sullivan, fire chief of San Francisco, and by every account, the one official who took the nightmare scenario seriously. While others saw a beautiful, invincible city, Sullivan saw a tinderbox waiting for its water to fail. Back in 1903, he'd made a formal proposal: build an auxiliary, high-pressure emergency water system, one that could pull from the bay and from dedicated cisterns when the mains broke. A separate lifeline for exactly this catastrophe. The city didn't build it, not while he was alive. The auxiliary water system Sullivan had begged for would finally be constructed years later, between 1909 and 1913. Long after it could have saved anyone. So, on the night of April 17th, this was San Francisco, a gorgeous, crowded city sitting on a fault, fed by pipes that would snap in an earthquake, defended by one man who'd predicted all of it and been ignored. Sullivan went home to his quarters that night. He lived above the fire station, Chemical Engine Company No. 3, on Bush Street. His wife's room was just down the hall. Next door stood the tall California Hotel, its brick chimneys and stone dome rising over the firehouse roof. Remember that hotel. Remember those chimneys. Because in a few hours, they were going to come down on the one man the city could not afford to lose. Across town at the Presidio, the Army slept. A brigadier general named Frederick Funston commanded the Department of California. He was competent, aggressive, decisive, and he knew almost nothing about fighting fires. That mattered, because Funston's own superior, Major General Adolphus Greeley, who commanded the entire Pacific Division, was away. He'd traveled east for his daughter's wedding, so the ranking officer on the ground, when everything broke, would be Funston. And at City Hall, the mayor was Eugene Schmitz, a former violinist turned politician installed by a corrupt machine run by a man named Abe Roof. Schmitz was charming and out of his depth, and within days he'd be making life and death calls about explosives. So here is the cast, all in place. The expert with the plan, asleep beside a hotel that's about to kill him. A general who'll improvise with dynamite. A mayor who'll follow his lead. And a city that doesn't know it has less than 3 days to live. The clock reaches 5:12 in the morning, April 18th, 1906. The first tremor rolls under the city, a foreshock sharp enough to wake people. And then, 20 to 25 seconds later, the Earth truly lets go. The rupture races nearly 300 miles along the San Andreas Fault. The shaking lasts close to a minute. Buildings twist off their foundations. Streets roll like water. And underground, exactly as Sullivan had warned, the water mains shatter. Hundreds of pipes break at once, most of them in the soft ground, and made land where the city had grown fastest. In a matter of seconds, San Francisco loses the ability to fight fire across most of its blocks. The tinderbox is armed, and on Bush Street, the California Hotel gives way. Its stone dome and its heavy brick chimneys crash straight down through the roof of Sullivan's firehouse, punching through the floors below. Sullivan is awake instantly. In the dark, in the dust, he moves toward his wife's room to reach her. But the floors he's walking on are already gone. He falls. 3 stories, down through the ruined structure, into the basement. And he lands on the boiler. Steam and scalding water pour over him. The one man who understood the fire before it started, the one man with a plan, is now broken and burned at the bottom of his own firehouse. He will linger for days. He will never fight this fire. Think about what the city just lost in that single minute. Not just an officer. The institutional memory. The years of warnings. The water plan. The fire break strategy. All of it locked inside a man now being carried out on a stretcher. Command of the fire department falls to his assistants, John Dougherty and Patrick Shaughnessy. Capable men. But Dougherty had already filed his retirement papers. He hadn't planned to be running toward the worst fire in the city's history that week. And already, within minutes of the shaking, the fires begin. Ruptured gas mains, overturned stoves, severed electrical lines throwing sparks into wooden walls. Small blazes flare up all across the city at once. On any normal day, a fire like any one of these is routine. You hook up to a hydrant and you put it out. But when the firefighters open the hydrants that morning, almost nothing comes out. The mains are broken. The pressure is gone. Exactly the scenario Sullivan had described for years. And the man who might have known what to do instead was gone before anyone even understood the water was lost. So the fires don't get put out. They grow. They start to reach toward each other, block by block, feeding on the wood frame buildings that made up so much of the city. Around 9:30 that morning, in Hayes Valley, a woman lights her stove to make breakfast. She doesn't know the quake has cracked her chimney. Flame finds the broken flue, and the walls catch. It became known as the Ham and Eggs Fire. It would burn some 30 blocks, a college, the Hall of Records, and eventually City Hall itself. And the response to this one fire is where the story turns from tragedy to something worse. Because with no water and no Sullivan, the men now in charge reached for the only tool that felt powerful enough to stop a fire this size: explosives. If you can't drown a fire, you tear down a wall of buildings in front of it and leave it nothing to burn. The principle is real. Fire breaks by demolition can work. If you use the right explosive, place it far enough ahead of the flames, and put trained hands on the job. That morning, San Francisco had none of those three things. General Funston, acting entirely on his own authority, ordered troops down from the Presidio before anyone in Washington even knew. No president signed off. No fire expert was consulted. The army marched in to run a fire it did not understand. And so the man who might have said, "Don't do it that way," not there, not with that powder, was 4 days from dying in a hospital bed and could say nothing at all. The city was about to try to blow up its way out of an inferno, and it was about to make the fire spread. The first buildings go down near Hayes Valley. Soldiers pack the explosive against the walls and step back. A crack, a roar, and the structure folds into the street. For a moment, it looks like a victory. A gap in the row of houses. Nothing left for the flames to grab. But this is the mistake Sullivan would have caught in a second. The crews are working too close to the fire front, and they're running out of the right powder. As the dynamite runs short, they start reaching for anything that explodes. Some of them switch to black powder, and black powder doesn't drop a building neatly into a gap. It's a low explosive. It shoves. It heaves burning wood and debris out sideways. Even the dynamite betrayed them. Lieutenant Raymond Briggs of the Army wrote it down himself. Tight, cased sticks detonated clean. But loose, granular dynamite didn't blast at all. It caught fire and burned, like a fuse the size of a house, so the demolition crews weren't clearing fire breaks. In case after case, they were building bonfires. Every misplaced charge lit new ground the flames hadn't reached yet. The clearest example comes at Clay and Kearny Streets. The crews there run out of their good-cased dynamite, so they pack a cheap lodging house with granular giant powder and set it off. It doesn't collapse into a break. It combusts. Bits of burning bedding are thrown clear across Kearny Street, and on the far side of that street sits Chinatown. Chinatown catches, not from the earthquake, not from a stove, from the Army's own explosion meant to save the block, jumping the street and setting the neighborhood alight. This is happening across the city all day. Buildings that were dynamited catch fire themselves. The response to the fire keeps becoming a new source of it. And the one man who understood the difference is lying in a hospital bed at the Presidio. Now understand something. This wasn't only the Army. The crews were a mix. Soldiers, exhausted city firemen, and civilian powder men. One of the civilians was John Birmingham's of the California Powder Works. He knew explosives. When the Army first needed him on the 18th, he showed up too drunk to use. They turned him away. So the expertise the city needed was either dying or drunk, or simply not there. And the flames kept climbing. As the fire grew, so did the fear. Mayor Schmitz posted a proclamation across the ruined city. It authorized federal troops and police to kill any person caught looting or committing any crime. Here's the part almost no one knows. Martial law was never actually declared. Not legally. Not by anyone with the authority to do it. But nobody told the soldiers that. Funston himself used loose language that made it sound official. And so armed men with rifles believed they had the power of life and death on a hunch. They used it. Soldiers and deputized guards shot civilians in the street, some over nothing more than a suspicion of looting. How many died this way, no one can say for certain. The records were never kept. For 3 days, the fire ate the city block by block. The Palace Hotel, where Caruso had slept the night before, burned by late afternoon. The St. Francis went up after a patrol's own cooking fire at Delmonico's swept into Union Square. The one strategy that actually worked wasn't the dynamite at all. Along Van Ness Avenue, a wide street, crews finally made a real fire break with enough distance to hold. and on the 19th and 20th, the wind held steady out of the northwest. Not a lucky shift. A steady push that kept the flames off the western neighborhoods long enough for the break to matter. On the evening of April 20th, the rain came. Quiet and 3 days late. By the 21st, the fire was essentially out. And on April 22nd, in the Army hospital at the Presidio, Dennis Sullivan died of his injuries. The fire he had spent his career trying to prevent had outlived him by exactly 1 day. When the smoke cleared, the scale was almost impossible to take in. Around 28,000 buildings gone. Nearly 500 city blocks, close to 4.7 square miles, burned flat. Out of a city of roughly 400,000 people, as many as 300,000 were left with nowhere to live. Half of them fled across the bay to Oakland and Berkeley just to have a roof. The ones who stayed ended up in army camps. 21 of them, official ones, spread across Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, Dolores Park, and the old parade grounds. The Army ran them with a hard hand. Rations were controlled down to a single loaf of bread per person early on. And able-bodied men were put to work clearing rubble whether they wanted to or not. And the discrimination that had shaped the city didn't burn away with everything else. Chinese refugees were pushed into a separate, isolated camp inside the Presidio. There was even a plan, chaired by the political boss Abe Roof, to move Chinatown out of the city entirely to Hunters Point and take the valuable land. It collapsed. Chinese residents simply came back. The Chinese government applied diplomatic pressure, and even local merchants fought it, unwilling to lose Chinatown's trade. The camps didn't close in a season. The last of them stayed open until June 30th, 1908. More than 2 years, thousands lived in tiny relief cottages, the earthquake shacks, rented at $2 a month against a $50 buyout. The Army handed relief back to the civil authorities on July the 1st. General Greeley, the superior who'd been away at his daughter's wedding while Funston acted alone, had long since returned to take command. And Funston? He wrote his own version. He published it in Cosmopolitan magazine that same year, titled How the Army Worked to Save San Francisco. The Army's own report told a flattering story. It was never formally censured for any of it. But the real cover-up was bigger, and it was about the dead. The official toll came back in 1907 at 478 people. That number was a lie by design. The Southern Pacific Railroad, insurance men, and the city's business leaders had every reason to keep it small. A city that looked survivable was a city worth investing in again. And there was a second motive underneath it. Most insurance policies covered fire, but not earthquakes. So it served everyone's wallet to blame the fire and quietly forget the quake, and to keep the body count low enough that no one questioned the recovery. The dead of Chinatown were counted least of all. Systematically undercounted, historians agree, and a true figure now impossible to recover. They were folded into the number no one wanted to see. It took a librarian to break it open. Gladys Hansen, working in the San Francisco Public Library, began counting the dead in the 1960s, name by name, and couldn't make the numbers agree. In 1989, she published her findings in a book with Emmett Condon. Its title said Everything: Denial of Disaster. Her count didn't stop at 478. The real toll was at least 3,000, likely more. In 2005, tied to the coming centennial, the Board of Supervisors formally set aside the old figure and recognized the truth she'd fought for. An undercounting of the dead that echoes the Galveston hurricane of 1900, where between 8,000 and 12,000 perished in a single night, yet the true toll was never known. A disaster we tell in another film. So here is where the story lands. The earthquake shattered the water mains in the first minute. But the fire that followed did nearly all the killing, and it burned for 3 days with no water to fight it. And the men who tried to stop it working blind with the wrong powder in untrained hands, kept starting new fires instead. The one man who might have done it right, who'd warned about the water for years and designed the system to fix it, was mortally wounded in the first 60 seconds. The system he proposed back in 1903 was finally built after his death. They called it the Auxiliary Water Supply System, finished in 1913, drawing on bay water and dedicated cisterns, everything he asked for while he was alive. The parts of that system still sit under San Francisco streets today. A monument to a fire chief who saw the whole thing coming and died before he could stop it in the basement of his own firehouse, struck down in the first minute of the disaster he'd spent his life preparing for.